Jonathan, it's good to see you. Good to be here. Thanks for your support, man. And to answer your question, these things, you know, obviously the way Priest has been for the last, 12 years, it's been more than a decade that I've been with Priest. Obviously, you go out on tour and then you go in the studio and that fires you up to go back out on the road. And so it has taken a while. There's a lot of ideas that I have floating around all the time. The COVID pandemic actually afforded me the time to do it, to get all those ideas and see what I've got, really. Did I have an album, an EP? Did I have a band? Did I have enough of an identity in the music that I could put a band around it? Those sort of questions. And that was the first time I could really get it all together, focus on the ideas, make some new ideas, get it together. And it's obviously it's a proud moment, and it's it's a bit nerve-wracking when you release a record or any statement onto the world. But at the same time, it's I'm very grateful that people are actually listening to it, and that's all you can ask for, really. Both good and bad opinions of it is an opinion. And also, anything I do and anything I will ever do is a representation of Priest in some way. I'm connected with them now, so I've got to make sure it's 1,000% and you give it your all and make it sound as good as you can. And that's what I've tried to do with this record, and that's what I'll always try to do. So that's where it all came from.
Well, I really think that you've delivered that, walking that fine line, because that's the thing, when you know that it's got your name on it, you're so now embedded in that Priest lore. Then people have an expectation there, and of course, rock and metal is in quite an interesting space at the moment, because I've even seen some journalists, referring to certain things. Like when Jeff Beck died, somebody, I won't name who it was, but they mentioned, legendary guitarist of the rock era. And I was like, holy fuck, the rock era? Like, what? Like, huh? Some people see it that way, and when you're putting out new music, it's important to be pushing things on, but still be able to have something that's relatable from fan expectation. And that's where I feel like this Elegant Weapons record really walks that fine line well. Was that a consideration when you were actually writing the music?
To some degree, I think you just got to be, in my mind, you just got to be who you are. I'm of a certain age. I grew up with, certain influences, and I think those influences are loud and proud on the record, and they should be. But at the same time, I'm conscious of it's 2023. I didn't want it to sound like a retro album. I wanted it to sound like an album in 2023. But I also didn't want to lose those influences. I think they're important. I remember we used to play in cover bands years ago, and people used to come down, this was in the mid-2000s, and people used to come down and we used to play AC/DC, and it was the first time.
I was there, mate. I was there. Metalworks, I was there.
People used to say, what is this stuff? This like, is this your stuff? And it's like, no, this is AC/DC. But point being, it was the first time they were hearing it then, and and then they went away from that and then checked out AC/DC. So our job was done. It was taking, there's nothing wrong, I don't think, with, carrying the torch however you can, whether it's playing covers of AC/DC or incorporating those elements into your music moving forward. I think you're right. Moving forward is always important, but I think it's got to be natural and organic in who you are. If I did something that was overtly modern and moving forward, it would be disingenuous to who I am as a guitar player, So you've got to be who you are, but also aware, we're not trying to make anything retro. So you're right, it's a fine line, but at the end of the day, you just got to do what comes out of you,
Absolutely. And, working with, you're very, used to working with great singers, of course, but, Ronnie is quite something, pretty special instrument there that he's got vocally. How quickly did that come together, like writing with this guy, with the ideas just flowing?
Well, everything was written. Ronnie was the last piece of the puzzle, really.
Wow.
Okay. Everything was written, and I needed to get a singer. And I actually, everything was recorded mostly, and I needed to get the vocals done on it. And I called Damon Johnson from Thin Lizzy, and he's now in Lynyrd Skynyrd. And I was saying, who do I get on vocals? Not only who's got a great voice, but who can front this and sort of, it's not only singing you need someone to front it and, be the focus and the front man and all that sort of stuff. And he mentioned Richie Blackmore and Ronnie, and it was like a light bulb went off. You can hear those influences in Ronnie's voice. But
Absolutely.
he's a singer in 2023. He's a modern singer, but I don't think he's shy of showing the world what those influences are. You can hear them, and it will fit the music perfectly. He's a great guy. I called him up and we talked, and he totally got where I was coming from, and we went from there. And he's fantastic. Again, not only a great singer, but great front man. He's got a great attitude, and he's natural. He just turns up and sings like a bird. He's just a natural singer.
I think it's a real testament to how great the music is, as well, because I would have had no idea that any of that had all been ready written or whatever before he was stepping in. So the fact that he's able to come into that project and make that just feel like it's such a cohesive unit, I mean, it really does speak volumes on the quality of the music. Just talking a little bit about the gear that you're using on there, because there is that real signature sound that you have. We're expecting that there's some Walls and Marshalls going on in there, and certainly a Gibson or an Epiphone in your hand. But can you talk us through the gear that you used for this record?
Yeah, that was basically what it was. It was a Marshall, and I had I've got a few of them in the other room. I got into the Marshall Plexi thing. And I just used that one amp. Usually you go in the studio and you try different amps for different things and different effects and stuff. And I just thought this amp was amazing at everything. So there's no acoustic guitar on it or anything. And all the clean guitars were done on the same amp with the volume rolled down on the guitar. Like you do at a gig, it's kind of, you strip it down to the bare minimum, whatever's functional, the least you have to carry, the better, that sort of approach. And the guitar it's a prototype of a Flying V that I'm working on with Gibson. I think we're releasing it soon.
Fantastic.
And it's the next version of a V that I've been playing with Priest for the last 12 years. So it was one guitar, one amplifier, and everything just worked out. And I just went with that. It was inspiring to have one sound and capture the character, and hopefully everything else is in your fingers, and everything else that people can hear, that character comes out through either my fingers or, the other guys in the band's character, so hopefully that's what came across.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, and thanks for bringing up the prototype, because I was going to be cheeky and ask. I mean, now that Cesar is, the main man over there at Gibson, and he's been we've seen that guitar in his hands on an Instagram post and what have you a couple of years back. I was going to see, where are we with this? But you're saying that quite soon we could get an announcement on this guitar then, yeah?
Yeah, I was shooting some promo stuff for it. Where are we now? I don't know what day it is.
It's 31st of May.
Well, it was last week. I think it was Thursday last week. I was shooting some promo videos for it, so it should be just around the corner. It's been a long time coming. I mean, I remember sitting down with Cesar and Mark Agnesi at dinner in 2000, just before the pandemic hit. We wanted to do another version of the V. Then the pandemic hit, and it was pointless to me to do a signature guitar that hadn't been out on the road, and it wasn't, so we had to get back out on the road. That was late 21. Then I had a health thing, so then we had to, so the end of 22, the guitar had been out on the road, tested. So now 2023, everything's good. The prototypes are approved, and we're going to release it. So it's a full-blown custom shop model. We've talked about doing an Epiphone version at some stage as well, but it was the guitar that recorded this record, so how appropriate can that be? You know what I mean? It's just the one guitar that done all this, so
it's perfect. And the thing is, man, that Epiphone guitar is a tough act to follow, because we know that those artisan range for quite a few artists that were limited runs. I mean, Epiphone really knocked it out of the park. It was a tremendous value for money, and as well, with it being the V, you're getting that. A lot of times with people, that they sometimes that they don't want the Epiphone headstock or whatever. With the V, it was the same as well. So it was like it was an incredible instrument. Was that a tough act to follow as well, in terms of like the road testing and the materials that you were going to be using, because there didn't seem to be any expense spared on the previous model.
Well, we were talking about going from an Epiphone to either a Gibson USA model or a custom shop model. That would be a change. I wanted to change the color. Up until then I've been playing black or white guitars. I wanted something that was different. I wanted something that really stood out. So we went with a Pelham blue. And the Pelham Blue now, when I see the Pelham Blue V, it's like, oh, that's my guitar. You know what I mean? Now I've played it for so long, I'm connected with it throughout the last couple of years with Priest. We've changed the pickups. The pickups in it are their signature EMGs. So they're my EMGs. They're called the RF Falcons, which is rocking. And they're going to be available separately as well. And apart from that, it's just the next version of the. It was a Gibson custom shop guitar that they made for me when I joined Priest, and it's been morphing over the years, which became the Epiphone, and then became this. So it's the next step in the evolution of it.
That's awesome. See, I was wondering if maybe the hold-up was trying to get Disney to sign off on a Star Wars crossover. You know,
that might be the next one. That's a good idea. I'll have to give you a commission on the if we ever do that. That's a good idea. But hold-up, really getting it out on stage and playing it live.
Sense.
And working through the kinks. I think the last thing we had to do was last year we had to change the neck slightly. The neck was slightly too fat. And I hate to admit it because everyone says they like a fat neck, but when it comes down to it, I play better with a slightly thinner neck, and that's just the reality of it. You know, no one likes to admit that, but it's true. So if it's going to be a signature guitar and it's my guitar, it needs to be the guitar that I play the best on for myself. You know, so we had to shave the neck down, and that was the last modification. We approved it, and I've just seen a friend of mine works at Guitar Center. He texted me the other day, and he said, this box just came in, and it was one of them. So I don't know. I think it's going to be sometime soon. They're going to be released. Yeah.
You know, so just touching on that there, because you mentioned the thickness and how it's like you want to challenge yourself. Now I know following your career, that's always been quite important to you. You know, you always just go that little bit heavier on the strings, a little bit heavier on the picks. Slightly thicker neck. I suppose it is from a certain era. There's a certain era of a player where that was the deal. Like right now as well. You see like a lot of guys coming up and it's all the thinnest necks as possible and 8s on the guitars and that's cool what they're doing. That's a whole different vibe. But how important was it for you in the sort of early days to continue to always sort of challenge yourself in that way with the instrument and almost have a little bit of a fight against the guitar?
That's exactly what it is. I feel more connected with heavier strings. You have to put your back into it, and it builds more of a connection to the instrument if you have to really wrench out the notes, And it was very important, and it was not only important, but that was just the way it had to be. It didn't feel right otherwise. It had to be a big, heavy boat anchor of a Les Paul to feel that guitar. I didn't want something light. It felt like a toy. So I wanted to feel that connection with the instrument when you're playing, Phantom of the Opera or whatever. It was the tool that worked, and it felt right, and it gave me a connection to it. Ticked all the boxes and felt right. I try different things from time to time. I try, sometimes like anyone, you have like challenges. Some things don't feel right, or you hit a bit of a wall. So I tried a thinner pick last year on the road with Priest for about 3 seconds, and started tape. It was Hellion electric eye. So the Hellion tape came on. We came on. I started the main riff, and I knew straight away this weren't going to work, and I threw it and played the 3mm. It's just the way. It's what you get used to. There's no right answer. There's no wrong answer. It's just what you get used to. What works for you and your playing style and your connection to the instrument, and that's always worked for me. I'm not saying it won't change in the future. Your pickups change, your amps change, and your guitar changes from time to time. But that's usually for me, the more connection I have to the instrument, the better.
Well, I think it's important to note that that even at your stage, where you're playing in one of the biggest bands in the world, biggest arenas in the world, and you're an absolutely superb player, you're still prepared to take risks and challenges and just see what's working for you on any given day. I mean, I think having such thick strings on the guitar, which is so important obviously for your sound, probably makes a lot more sense to have the thicker pick, just in terms of the ease of trying to move through the string. I'm imagining then with that light pick, it couldn't even move the string. Is that what you were feeling?
I think you're right. I think it's the combination of those things. The thicker strings work better with the thicker pick, maybe. The thinner pick, if there were thinner strings on there, it might work better, and that the combination of the action you have with those strings, with the frets. So if it's lower, if it's, it's a combination of neck. If you've got a bigger neck, I need a lower action. So if it's a thinner neck, I can get away with a higher action. So it's the combination of all those things go together. And it's like, the Goldilocks, you get the porridge that's just right for you. And all of those things, pick, strings, frets, neck shape, neck size, action, so that they all go together and make what the combination that works for you as a player. And again, there's no right or wrong answer. It's just what works for you.
How have you found, sort of managing tension as a player? Because, the combination of having, the thick pick, the thick strings, and also what you're able to do is you sound like you really dig in to the instrument, that you really attack it, because you can hear that, that pick attack. Sometimes when it's a thick, the two thick parts that we talked about there, it can be quite a rolled off sound. It can be a little, a little boomy or what have you. That's never ever been something that you associate with your playing. It's always a really aggressive pick attack. So do you find that you've had to sort of manage tension over the years with like certain sections that you just dig in a little bit more and then chill out a little bit, or is it not really something you think too much about?
Not really. I do have. It depends how much I play. If I'm not playing as much, I have problems with bending and stuff like that. I have to play a bit more. I remember I was playing so much at one time. I think I was using 12s in standard tuning and bending all over the place, and it was easy. I couldn't do that now. So, it depends how much I play. But with the tonal characteristics, I've never had a problem. I think you might be right with the size of the pick and the way it hits the string. And I think you can always compensate, even if it is, thicker strings, it might be a little bit dull on the top end maybe, but you can always compensate for that on the amplifier. There's nothing you can't. And conversely, if thinner strings are a bit more bright, you can take that presence down a little bit. There's nothing you can't compensate for on the amp, I don't think. So I've never really had a problem. The only problem I've had is, as I said, if I'm not playing enough, it becomes a bit difficult. As it would, like anything, you don't practice enough, you get a bit rusty, but that's just the nature of the beast. Of
course. Now, just to go back to Horns for a Halo, which, for anyone watching the interview right now, go and check out the album. It's available to stream absolutely everywhere. Fantastic record. Now, of course, throughout the record, there's some killer solos as well, which we wouldn't expect anything less. But just to touch a little bit on Ghost of You, because that's really been a track right now that, the first week of release, you're still getting used to the new songs and new ones sort of pop out. And, I'd love to be speaking to you again, a year from now, and it'll be interesting to see which ones, become the new favourites. But with Ghost of You, absolutely superb track from start to finish. But that solo, man, one of your finest moments in my opinion. Can you talk us through a little bit about the construction of that guitar solo?
Well, first of all, I appreciate you saying that. I mean, a lot of people have been mentioning it in interviews, and it sticks out on the record. I think it's the only ballad, quote unquote, on there. The construction of the solo, you make me sound like I know what I'm doing when I do it. Yes, I constructed the solo. Like I have no idea. I rack out a few and see what kind of motifs stick and what sound good and what jump out. And sometimes I'll do it a few times and the same motif keeps jumping out. So that's when you know that naturally that's the way you're going with it. And then I'll try and make it sound like I'm meant to play it. So that's so it comes naturally first of all, and then I'll try and recreate what came naturally with a bit more precision. And as I said, trying to make it sound like I'm meant to play it. But as far as constructing it, I wish I could say that I'm that sort of player, but I'm not. I just kind of sit there and rack out something and then kind of put it together around what comes out naturally.
Man, that's the thing. I mean, with greats like you, that's how it works. I mean, I guess it's one of these ones too, when you can just do it. Sometimes you don't want to overanalyze it. You don't want to ruin that magic, because there's something very fresh about how you sound when you take a guitar solo, and it's like to make it too laborious, could ruin the magic, and you really feel that energy. I was wondering, is there a little bit of a Mr. Scary influence on there on certain parts?
Not consciously. I was never. I know why you're asking, but I was never really a big Dokken or Lynchmore fan. He knows that as well. He wouldn't be mad at me for saying that. But no,
tremendous guitar player though.
Oh, he's phenomenal. I mean, when he comes around, he's a unique guitar player. You can tell it's him. You could always tell it was him. I remember on those, used to get like guitar CDs, Guitar Technique CDs, and used to put them on, and he was always one on there, like learn a lick in the style of, and you could always tell it was him. It was like in the same way that Randy Rhoads had little things here and there. George had those little things that made him unique as well, and that's important as a guitar player, as you know. You've got to have those little things. Like Tipton's the same. He's like so unorthodox sometimes. But yeah, not consciously. I'm sure there's stuff in there that's indirectly, if it's inspired someone else that I've then listened to, that they've got something from George, and then I've sort of looked to them for inspiration, then maybe indirectly, because he's such a influence on so many players, but not directly, no.
Well, I touched just slightly on the Star Wars thing, and I know you're a big sci-fi guy, and we're just talking about different influences and what have you. Do you ever find like a movie that you've watched or a different form of art like can inspire a songwriting session, or like can these things come from unexpected sources?
Massively. I think for me more so than other music sources, really. I think Schenker said it. He said he creates more than he consumes, and I think that goes for me as well on the music front. But movies and TV, I'm always sort of watching or listening to soundtracks on that front. So stuff like Blade Runner, the way that you mentioned Star Wars, the way that soundtrack influenced my life, just the way the music is, it's part of who a lot of us are, the John Williams stuff. But I mean, Blade Runner for sure. I could sit down, I paint Warhammer 40K sometimes, and I put Blade Runner on, and it takes you to another world. And I think Maiden just did their first few shows in Eastern Europe, and they opened the show with Somewhere in Time, that Blade Runner intro with the lasers, like the lights, the neon stuff. It's just like takes you somewhere else, So that can definitely, the synth stuff, if it's done tastefully and appropriately. You might start with a synthy kind of intro, and that translates to guitar that maybe you wouldn't have come up with on a guitar otherwise. So yeah, I think it definitely can have a different influence.
Because it's such a passion of yours, and you're very well versed in it. Do you think, the idea of scoring like a sci-fi or dystopian kind of movie, would that be something that would interest you?
It would definitely interest me. I don't think I'm qualified for that sort of stuff. I could do Sabbath or AC/DC riffs, potentially, but no, to score a movie like that, that's some serious stuff. So I'd like to have a go though, maybe sometime. I mean, why not? Yeah. Have a attempt at something like that.
Absolutely. And then final thing on Star Wars. I mean, so how are you feeling about the Star Wars universe as a big fan? Are you happy with the way things are right now?
I'm an Ridge guy. So like a Ridge and Rogue One, that's me. Everything else to me has been a bit of a wet blanket to me. But
Rogue One it's an underrated picture, isn't it? I would say.
Yeah, it was a good one. I enjoyed that. It took me by surprise. Maybe that's why I wasn't expecting anything, and it took me by surprise. So the original trilogy would never be beaten. Even Return of the Jedi. I mean, people knocked the Ewoks, but I didn't have a problem with them.
No.
Yeah, the Ridge and Rogue One, that's me. All the other stuff. There was a couple of Mandalorian, the first two seasons of The Mandalorian were okay. And then the last one I thought was a bit...
Yeah, it fell off. It fell off, didn't it?
It fell off is the right word.
Yeah, it definitely did. Just to touch a little bit on like that whole Metalworks era, and you're doing the Voodoo 6 stuff, and that was, my introduction to seeing you, and it blew me away right from the start, to be honest. That seemed like quite a special time really for music, playing live in London and around that sort of Camden scene. It ended up having a little bit of a ceiling on it for quite a lot of the bands that were, really cooking at the time. But do you have some fond memories of playing those shows and being out every week?
Oh man, it made me who I am as a guitar player. Like, no doubt about it. We were out, 4 or 5 nights a week playing Irish bars and pubs everywhere. Like, there would be no one in there after time. And then obviously we'd done the Camden thing on the Sunday. That was the main event. But we were playing all the time. And sometimes you absolutely hate it. You're somewhere in Archway at 3 o'clock in the morning, freezing cold, carrying out Marshall cabinets, 412 cabinets that, like, no one cares anyway. You've got your rig, you've got your 412. No one cares, but you're there doing it. You absolutely hate it. You've got to get to work in a few hours to earn your money. And then you hate it. You're cursing under your breath and whatever. But you're there the next night doing it again because you love it. That's who you are. And when you realize that, you can hate something so much sometimes, but you're there doing it the next day because you love it so much. Then that's just when you realize that's who I am, and that's the way it's always going to be. You know what I mean? So it taught me. It's like when the Beatles went to Hamburg and they got their 10,000 hours. They say 10,000 hours makes you an expert. I don't know about that with me, but I think that was my 10,000 hours with Metalworks. Driving in a van around to pubs and religiously every week. That's what you did, and it made me the player I am today, for sure.
What was the worst show you had at that time?
Oh man, there's millions of them. There were, I'd say 90% of them were awful. And it was the Sunday.
In what way? What made it awful?
No one there. It was playing songs I didn't want to play. Freezing cold, late at night. Like, no one cared. People throwing up on your pedals. It was just a nightmare. But it was all that stuff going on. It was an education, really, without knowing it. It was, an education on gear, what worked, what didn't work. I said earlier on, like, stripping back stuff to the stuff that works, the bare essentials. You realize what works in a band context sonically. You learn how to listen to the band and be a part of a band. Listening, watching each other. You build up your musical intuition like that. Performing to some degree, even when there was 2 men and a dog there. You've got to get up there and do it anyway, and you play differently. So all that bad stuff is an education, really, and you make it a positive thing. You learn a lot from it.
Absolutely. And just to, I'm not keeping you too much longer. I appreciate your time today, Richie. But just to touch a little bit on Priest. I mean, how are things coming along with the new material?
It's sounding great. I think we've finished tracking. Rob was the last one to put down what he needed to put down, so he had to do some vocals. I think that's done now. So Andy Sneap is mixing it probably as we speak. He sent me some because he's reamping some of the guitars. So he sent me his guitar room the other day with some like it looked like one of Bob Rock's rooms from the Black Album. He had like I won't say what he was using because the internet will you shouldn't be using that on the Priest. I'm not gonna do that to him. But he was playing some stuff through it. It sounded mighty. So he's mixing it. Then we've got to master it. Then we've got to manufacture it. So actually make the stuff. So I'm not sure when it'll be out, but it's finished as far as tracking. So when it's done, we'll let you know and unleash it onto the world.
And you're happy with it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was a high bar with the Firepower record. We set the bar high. It connected with a lot of people, the Firepower record. So, but that's a good challenge to have. It's one of those things you've got to meet and surpass that bar if possible. And I think we've done it. A lot of people,
of course,
the internet will disagree with me there, but I think otherwise we wouldn't be releasing something we thought was subpar, and that's the way it is.
Of course, with you guys, you had quite a few delays there in terms of getting back out on the road and playing live, and of course these shows that you did last year, tremendous. We've got a follow-up to that in 2024 when you guys will be back in the UK. I'm assuming there's no end in sight here for Priest. There's got to be more dates coming.
There usually
beyond.
is. When we start announcing dates, it usually rolls on. It's very rare that Priests do a handful of dates and that's it. So, it's usual that there's more to come, and then we'll end up doing some more stuff, album release, and stuff like that. So watch this space.
Look, mate, absolute pleasure chatting with you. Congratulations on Elegant Weapons. You guys are going to be playing the Steelhouse Festival later this year as well, yeah?
We are, yeah. We're going out. I'm leaving actually on Sunday. We've got some rehearsals in England, and then we fly out to Prague for our first show with Pantera. Hopefully we survive. If we survive that, we're going to be going on to be doing some. We've got four dates with Pantera, and then we do some festivals in Europe, and then ending with the Steelhouse Festival in the UK. So we're stoked.
Fantastic. Well, I look forward to seeing you there. You know, congrats again on the record, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, brother. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, man.